Today's episode is brought to you in part by Brilliant, The Art of Literary Radiance by Jenny Forrester. Forrester's writing instruction manual and manifesto is a call to tell a story, for your own sake and for others. Art as activism, the personal as political. Brilliant is more than craft, more than memoir. It's prophecy, resistance, transformation. Forrester invites you to dismantle the narratives that oppress and to build the ones that liberate, to write as witness, to write as revolution, to write not just beautifully, but meaningfully. Whether you're a poet, a novelist, a truth teller, or an experimentalist, this book is your companion, your catalyst, your call to the page. Radically personal, fiercely political, fearlessly radiant. Brilliant, The Art of Literary Radiance is available now at powells.com or by contacting the author directly at the email jenny@theforest.org. Write like the world depends on it. Today's episode is also brought to you by There Are Reasons for This by Nini Berndt, a stunning novel that, in the words of Kristen Arnett, is messy beautiful, gorgeous and compelling. When Lucy arrives in Denver in search of Helen, the woman her recently dead brother loved, she finds nothing is as she expected. The city is crumbling, the weather is tempestuous, and she's increasingly obsessed with Helen, who has no idea who Lucy truly is. Called Haunting and Incantatory by Kimberly King Parsons, There Are No Reasons for This is a modern love song about the fallibility of love in all its iterations, about the denial and tethering of desire, about the family we are given and the one we find for ourselves, and to what comes next, whatever that may be. There Are Reasons for This is available now from Tin House. Before we begin today's conversation with Adrienne Maree Brown, I want to say a couple things about voice. First, my voice in this conversation, which longtime listeners are going to notice is unusually and inexplicably low. You might think I have a cold. No. You might think I have allergies. Not the case. I even stop at the beginning as I'm introducing her, marveling at how I sound to myself, and say, outside the interview, let me drink some water to clear the frogginess out of my voice. But to no avail. Our conversation is about, among many other things, cross-species solidarity and cross-species ritual magic. So perhaps the frogs are indeed insisting on their presence. I can't say. Or maybe it's a second puberty, as I did think about chanting my Torah portion at my bar mitzvah, not knowing which of my two voices, the old or the new, would come out. But what was even more uncanny than hearing one's own voice as other was at the very end of our conversation, having just talked about ancestors and ancestral spirits, I asked Adrienne to read a poem, and quite suddenly, as she gets ready to begin, her voice becomes really different. And for a moment, she isn't sure she can proceed, and she says something like, just so you know, when I talk about ancestors, they get up all in my throat. So, puberty, frogs, or ancestors, something was going on, not just for me, but for both of us. And staying with the theme of voices, even if we didn't talk at length about songs and singing in this conversation, it would be a special thing that for the bonus audio archive, Adrienne sings two of the songs in the Grievers Trilogy. But after you hear our discussion about songs, you'll see even more how special it is that she contributed this to the archive. And strangely, while most of the bonus audio archive is readings, some craft talks, some writing prompts, and some translation interviews, lately people have been contributing song. Whether Leanne Batasamasek-Simpson giving us a sneak peek of her upcoming album, or two past guests of the show, Dow Strom and Alicia Jo Rabins, who have since collaborated on an EP that they released this year, sharing 2 tracks from it. The bonus audio is only one of many things to choose from when you join the Between the Covers community as a listener supporter. And no matter what you choose, every supporter gets resources with each and every conversation and is invited to join our collective brainstorm of who to invite into the future. You can check it all out at patreon.com/betweenthecovers. And now for today's episode with Adrienne Maree Brown.
Good morning and welcome to Between the Covers. I'm David Naiman, your host. Today's guest, writer Adrienne Maree Brown, has been many things, from a doula to a social justice facilitator, to the author of many books, including Emergent Strategy, Pleasure Activism, We Will Not Cancel Us, and Other Dreams of Transformative Justice, and Holding Change. Emergent Strategy, both the book and the practice, looks to science, to emergent patterns in the non-human, plant and animal worlds, as models for adaptation and inspiration, and also to science fiction, particularly the philosophy of change in the works of Octavia Butler. Brown, along with Alexis Pauline Gumbs, published the Octavia Butler Strategic Reader. She's run a series of Octavia Butler-based science fiction writing workshops, and she collaborated with Walida Imarisha and Cherie Renee Thomas on the anthology Octavia's Brood, Science Fiction Stories from Social Justice Movements, which contains writings from everyone from LeVar Burton to Mumia Abu-Jamal. Adrienne Maree Brown is also a podcaster, co-host of Octavia's Parables, a deep dive into Butler's Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, as well as the co-host of the podcast How to Survive the End of the World, with her sister, Autumn Brown. As if that were not enough, Adrienne is also a writer of science fiction herself. She attended the Clarion Sci-Fi Writers Workshop and Voices of Our Nation in the inaugural cohort for their speculative fiction workshop. And she was the 2015 Ursula K. Guin Feminist Science Fiction Fellow at the University of Oregon Special Collections Library and Archives, which houses the papers of key feminist science fiction authors, including Joanna Russ, Molly Gloss, James Tiptree Jr., and Ursula K. Guin herself. Brown's first appearance on Between the Covers was in 2022, as part of the Crafting with Ursula series, where we looked at the relationship between science fiction and social justice, between the imagination and organizing in both Le Guin's work and Brown's work side by side. Since then, she has published Fables and Spells, Collected and New Short Fiction and Poetry, and Loving Corrections, where she brings her writings on belonging and accountability into a generative space, a loving corrections frame, where rehearsals for the revolution become the everyday norm in relating to one another. But the reason for Adrienne's return today is because the year before we first talked was Adrienne's fiction debut with the book Grievers, a book that inaugurated AK Press's Black Dawn series, which aims to foreground the values of anti-racism, feminism, anti-colonialism, and anti-capitalism, as well as centering queerness, blackness, and anti-fascism. Grievers was met with critical acclaim and was followed by the book Maroons, both receiving starred reviews by Publishers Weekly. And the occasion of our conversation today is the arrival of the third and final book in the Grievers Trilogy, called Ancestors. Michigan poet laureate Nandi Comer says of this book, "This post-industrial, post-pandemic, post-apocalyptic novel examines the collective struggle for harmony in the face of personal and collective trauma. Ancestors delivers tender conjecture full of somatic healing, spiritual fortitude, and human reconnection. This is the book we need." Welcome back to Between the Covers, Adrienne Maree Brown.
Thank you, David. You're one of my favorite people to have share a bio. I'm always like, I'm doing great at life when you introduce me.
Oh, well, one thing that is really great about discussing your trilogy as a trilogy,
Mm,
looking at the movement between Grievers, Maroons, and Ancestors, and what that movement across books might teach us, is that it gives us a chance to look at the ways many of your ideas in nonfiction, whether emergent strategy or pleasure activism or loving corrections, manifest in this fictional world, especially because seeing them dramatized is really, I think, unforgettable. But before we explore that, I think we need to do a little bit of world building together and discuss what I would call the three Ds: the situation, the disease, the setting, Detroit, and the main character, Dune, all of whom we encounter at the beginning of the first book, Grievers. It's really impossible to separate these three elements, I think, but let's start with the disease. The disease that Dune's mother is patient zero of, and which only seems to be happening in Detroit. Talk to us about syndrome H8, both what it looks like when you get it, what it looks like if you come across someone with it, who gets it, what we know and what we don't know, and even what you were thinking about as you began imagining it.
beautiful. Yeah, maybe I will answer that a little in reverse, is what I was thinking about. I moved to Detroit in 2009 and I started writing this text in like 2011. And part of why was because being in Detroit was being in this city that was both a ghost town and felt like a place of tons of new birth. So driving around, I was with someone who loved to share the history of the city. We would drive around and they would point out things like that used to be the Motown building. And actually, when they demolished it, there were Stevie Wonder lyric pages flying down the street. And that
Oh,
used to be this. And that used to, like they would point stuff out like this was a major place in our labor history. And this is a major place. And there was just this sense of like, there was so much that was here, and a ton of it was empty lots. So it'd be like just, it would look like this is this spacious city. But if you were with someone who knew the history, they were like, this used to be a booming block, a community, like tons of people here. And now they're all gone. And you could, once you knew that, it was like, oh, of course you can feel the presence of all that's not here. So, syndrome H8, when that came to me, it was like, what would it look like if the grief that we feel about being in places where everything is gone or where all of our people are gone, what would it feel like if that was quantifiable as like a physical grief, a physical experience that other people would be like, oh, they're in that place. They've crossed over into this unimaginable grief that you can't necessarily return from. And I was like, is calling it H8, which is hate, is that too on the nose? But I was like, I want to make it as clear as I can that there's something about this disease that is targeted at people, because I was like, I was sitting with that I'm like, the impact of living inside of a people who other people don't want to exist manifest in our physical bodies and makes it almost impossible for us to live into our full capacity of life, our full lifespan. And I know so many people with so many different stories where they're like, and I know that the stress of living under racism and inside of patriarchy and inside of capitalism and all these other, I know that if, I remember my friend Alexis Pauline Gums, when her dad died, she was like, I know, because he's black, that played a part in why he died so early. And I grew up in those stories where my grandmother and great grandmother died in hospitals where it felt like they didn't get the care they needed. And so anyway, I was all of that was swirling around, and I was like, what if that was a disease? If we were able to say there's a disease that's targeting Black people. So what happens, to Dune is she watches her mother get this, and she's witnessing, they're in the kitchen together, and all of a sudden her mother, who's mid-sentence, just stops talking, and she's just kind of glazed and staring straight ahead, and she's breathing, but that's it. There's no other sign of functionality. There's no will. There's no capacity to move. There's no capacity to respond. There's no sense that there's anybody inside able to respond. In that first book, it's a mystery what's happening for the person, right? We
yeah.
don't actually know what the experience is like from inside. And in truth, throughout the book, we never fully understand what that is, but I give some strong hints of, that felt like me just being like, I have some assessments of what happens in the spirit realm, but I'm not going to fully assert it. But I do know that they don't die. They transition. They move to a different consciousness and a different reality, a different place of spirit. And that felt important for me because I was like, I'm surrounded by spirit. And I think anyone in Detroit will know this feeling. I think there's other cities that carry this too. Like when I'm in New Orleans, I'm like, this place is thick, much thicker than the amount of people standing around me right now. I can just feel the layers. So, anyway, so the syndrome happens and it's targeting Black people. We don't know that right away, but pretty soon it becomes clear that that's who is coming down with this, and no one is recovering. It's like once you get this, your system's all shut down. You stop receiving food. You stop. There's just nothing that is translating out. It's like a comatose state, and that quickly overwhelms the entire medical structure of Detroit. So then it becomes, well, who can receive care, and does it make sense to receive care when no one is recovering? And then they end up quarantining the city. And later along in the journey, you'll learn that there's a man-made component to this syndrome, and that felt important to me too, because I think most of the things our folks are sick with now are man-made. So yeah, that's some stuff around H8.
Well, because there's so little known about what it is or how it's spread, much like with COVID at the beginning and the debate
Yeah.
between, say, a lab leak and a market spillover, there are various theories about H8. And one, given that it affects only Black people, like you said, is that it's man-made and that it was actually created specifically to target Black people in one of the blackest cities in America.
Yeah.
I initially presumed that this was you working through and being inspired by your own experience in pandemic lockdown, but that isn't the case at all. And our first question for you is actually about this. This question is from the writer, artist, facilitator, mother, and theologian Autumn Brown,
Ah.
the front woman of the eponymously named soul pop band Autumn. She's also a writer of speculative fiction and creative nonfiction. And she co-hosts the amazing podcast, How to Survive the End of the World, with her sister named Adrienne Maree Brown. So here's a question for you from Autumn.
Hey, sister. Surprise.
What a good
Okay,
surprise.
it's kind of weird that we've never talked about this, but here's my question about the Grievers Trilogy. So the first book of the trilogy is published in September 2021. But you started writing this book, which is about a pandemic of grief, long before the COVID-19 pandemic actually began. And then the other two books are written in the wake of the pandemic. Most readers of science fiction will recognize the narrative device of a pandemic as a really effective way of looking at one of the core questions that science fiction asks, which is, if we keep going down this path, then what? It's an incredible device for looking at how social relationships can be rapidly reshaped by rapidly unfolding conditions that are beyond our control, which is arguably what is actually true most of the time. But I digress. The thing I want to ask you is this. How did living through an actual pandemic shape the writing process for the series as a whole? The virus, this grief disease, is sort of its own character in the series. How did you come to understand its role in the story, and how was that shaped by our actual lives? That's my question. I love you so much.
I love you too.
I hope you're having a good time recording. Okay, bye.
That's such a sweet surprise and a good question. Yeah, one thing to understand is I had written the book. I started writing in 2011. It first showed up as a short story. And, when I went to VONA, when I went to Voices of Our Nation, I had Tanana Reeve Dew as my teacher for a week of scholarship. And we brought the story there. We worked it there. And she was like, you want to understand the short story and then build out as much as you can. And I worked on it for years. It kept being like a short story, a play. I kept changing form. And then when Black Dawn was like, do you have anything that could work to launch this series? I sent them this manuscript and they basically came back. Sanina came back and she was like, I think you have the first two books of a trilogy here. So both Grievers and Maroons were mostly written, I'd say like 75% of them were written before the pandemic, this COVID-19 pandemic. So I learned a lot when we went through actual COVID. One of the biggest lessons, because one of the things I was concerned about in the book that always worries me when I'm in any sci-fi world is how much can I just focus on this world that I'm in, and how much do I need to think about how the rest of the world would respond to what's happening here, and like how much I need to attend to the world beyond the borders in which I want to work right now. And I was like, I want to be in Detroit with the understanding that Grace Lee Boggs had always dropped in, which is like Detroit shows what the rest of the country has to look forward to. Detroit shows what the rest of the world has to look forward to. Like there's something particular about what happens here with capitalism and race and the ecology of the place that is a foreshadowing. So I was like, if I can just focus on Detroit, I will learn something about the rest of this country's possibility and potential. So going through actual COVID-19 was really helpful because initially when it was contained, when it was like, there's something going on in China, right? There was a real sense of like, oh, that's far away from me. And like, it's scary. I'm sad that that's happening. But it's far away from my life. And the immediate crisis of my life continued to take precedent. And then when they were like, oh, now it's here and now it's closer. And I happened to be in Italy when it reached Italy, and I was on sabbatical. So I was very much like not paying attention, not watching the news, not on social media, like not tuning in. And I landed in Italy 2 weeks before the like everything, the whole world shut down, like right at the beginning of March of that year. And so all of a sudden, because I was there, it mattered. And I started having to pay attention, and family members were like, do you understand what's going on? And I was like, oh, so suddenly it became relevant to me. But so that idea of like, when did it become relevant to me? Like, when did it become something that was impacting my life? Helped me feel permission to really dive in to the Detroit of it all. Cause I was like, because they quarantined relatively quickly and whatever this is starting here, it's happening here. It was okay. You know, I was like, oh yeah, especially the pace of crisis between 2011 to 2020 and 2021 picked up so rapidly that like the amount of people that would have paid attention, I think in 2011, even to something happening in one place was already different. Less people can pay attention to anything that's happening anywhere now. Like we live in this world. So I was like, okay, I can just dive in Detroit. And I know that like people will be like, something weird is happening in Detroit, but we don't really know what's going on there. And there's so many other crises going on. We're not going to hyper focus. So I was like, okay, I can just kind of like let my folks go through this experience. I think the other like small strange thing was like in my first book in Grievers, I hadn't written people having like masks or doing any of that. And I was like, oh, right. And I didn't go overboard with that, but I was like, that's one of the things that quickly I learned. I was like, oh, yeah, when there's a pandemic, people suddenly are like PPPs, like we got to cover our face and cover our hands and do all this stuff. And the way that the syndrome moves is like people don't have a sense of how it spreads. People are like, maybe it's in the water, maybe it's in the air, like we're not quite sure, at least initially. And I remember that part of COVID-19 and being like, yeah, like the uncertainty, like being inside the population where everything is happening around you and people are just dying all around you. And I wanted to capture that feeling of like the person you run into on the corner or at the store or in line for donated goods or something, they might be the ones who are giving you the information or more trustworthy information than what you're getting from the news. And the news is doing this sort of broader strokes thing, either catastrophizing it or, you know, trying to be very theoretical with the doctors or whatever. All of that felt like I was like, oh, going through the experience of COVID helped me to, I think, ground the pandemic that was happening in the book in more sense of like, yeah, here's what we really do. But I also wanted to catch that feeling of like waiting, right? So that's before COVID-19 ever came along. From my doula work, you know, birth doula, death doula, sickness doula, all that stuff. I was like, so much of grief is waiting and sitting and feeling and like not being able to do anything. So Grievers, I gave Dune permission to just be in such overwhelming grief, but also something in her still wanting to stay alive. And like my experience of grief, you know, that's exactly the heart of it, is being like, it's just too much to feel the loss, but something in me still wants to stay just enough alive that I'm going to nourish myself or give myself some water. And I let her go further than I've ever gone. When I'm grieving, I still usually try to like buck up and participate in things. And I was like, well, what would the level of crisis need to be where I didn't even feel I needed to do that anymore? And COVID-19 gave me that lived experience too, where I was like, no, I'm not going to buck up. I'm going to sit in my house and
Yeah.
cry.
Yeah.
And then thinking about like how long it takes for people to want to return to normal. I think that shaped the second two books. Maroons and Ancestors both feel like I've been astounded by how quickly this world has wanted to like blow past the safety protocols that we knew would help us to get back to normal. And that's both true within the communities that have gone through hurt and in the larger society. And so I was able to work with that, to be like, yeah, even if you're living inside of a total apocalypse, there's some part that's like, okay, how do we create some normalcy and some rhythms of community here? If we're by ourselves, if we're in small groups, if we're in a larger societal experiment, how do we give ourselves something that feels normal, and how important it is like to our desire to continue. So yeah, those are some of the ways that it interplayed with the writing process.
Well, you could definitely read this trilogy as the deepest of love letters to Detroit. This book
Yes.
couldn't be more lovingly place-based. I've never been there, but I feel like I have been there now. I was even rooting for the Pistons in the playoffs this year because of your
Yes.
books.
Thank you.
I feel like you've already spoken into why Detroit and what Detroit provides as a setting, what lens it gives us into the past, present, and future of our country. But I wanted to ask you about how you portray the world in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
The first book in the trilogy is the most fraught book. It has all the fear and isolation that an unknown plague brings with it. It has a lot of other things too, but compared to the other books, things are the most dystopian at the beginning. And yet, unlike Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, where resource scarcity and poverty and the breakdown of government services leads to immense violence, the breakdown of societal norms, even the rise of modern-day slavery and human trafficking, and mentions in passing of the possibility of cannibalism, your book, even at its most dystopic moments, has none of this. The books aren't about this. They are about survival, about grief, and about death in that first book, but mainly not in competition with anyone else. I wondered if you could spend a moment talking about this choice in the series, which I think deeply affects the tenor and the atmosphere of the trilogy as a whole.
I kind of went back and forth on this one, right? I was like, I feel like I've read so many texts where the worst of us comes out and we turn on each other and everyone's stealing from each other, killing each other, that all these other things are happening. But then I've lived through multiple large scale crises in my life. And what I've noticed is how quickly people turn towards care and towards trying to help each other, and also towards some anarchy, that there's a way that people are like, okay, like whoever we thought was going to get us through this or get us out of this doesn't seem to be present right now. So we've got to figure this out. And how quickly people become capable of providing something to their communities. So I wanted to lean into that. And that might be the most utopian aspect of these books. Like I really tried not to make a utopia. And I got in some trouble with my ancestors by the end of Maroons, because they were like, girl, that's a utopia. Like, you need to get it together. But, but, I never think of a maroon space as utopia, because I'm like, what it actually takes to survive in a place that is not set up the way you were societally trained to survive can feel like such labor that it's like, oh, this isn't the utopia I was thinking of. Most of us, I think when we imagine utopia, there's still this, even if we're not aware of it, there's still this sense of like someone is taking care of us. And I'm like, well, whoever's taking care of you is not in the utopia generally. So anyway, that doesn't mean some of these things aren't happening. There's a scene where Dune goes into a grocery store that she thinks is abandoned, and there's someone in there and they're armed, and like there's this sense of danger and this sense of like, oh, like if I wasn't me, or if I wasn't able to come up with a coherent story for why I was here, like this might not go well. And that she's on guard, but that then I also wanted to represent like even the people protecting that store, like anyone else, they're just trying to also survive. And I was like, what if everyone in this story is written as someone who's trying to survive with some benevolence and some compassion, rather than writing about it as like, these people are trying to survive and they'll kill everybody, you know. It felt really helpful to write it that way and to imagine it that way and to imagine into what I felt, you know, like also the COVID-19 experience, like reiterated this into my heart, you know, was like, look, like folks are not running in the streets and stealing from anybody. They're just, everybody's like trying to stay safe and
Yeah.
trying to get their needs met. And like, if any running is happening, it's like people with resources running to hoard what they can from the stores. But everyone else is just like, how are we going to do this? And like, do I have the privilege to make adaptations for this thing, or am I in a quote unquote essential worker where that means I don't have necessarily the same agency other people do to stay safe? I was much more interested in the internal work of letting a society break down inside you and then having to figure out what makes life worth living and who makes life worth living on the other side of that. I'll also say there's something here around when you feel like you're of a community versus looking from the outside. You know, I keep thinking about this watching Gaza or, you know, stories about the Sudan, the Congo, and places where I'm like, from the outside, we just see this death and destruction and the horrors of it all. But from within, there are just people who are like, I'm trying to keep my kids engaged through this struggle. And I'm trying to find some bread today. And I'm trying to, like, everyone's a human being. So everyone's trying to do the same things we would all try to do in those moments, which is like, I've got to take care of basic needs and I've got to take care of the people around me. And that's what I experienced living in Detroit, was like a lot of people who are rooted in care and trying to figure out how to offer care to each other. So yeah, I gave myself permission to focus on the emotions of the characters that I was in and not giving them a multitude of existential crises. Also, I'm like, there's already enough. Like having a pandemic is enough. Living on an earth that is in crisis is already enough.
I love that element of the book.
Yeah.
I also love this notion of what you just said about breaking down society inside of us.
Inside of us.
Yeah.
That's the piece. So Dune is the main character, and she is the child of two activists, like organizers in Detroit. But she grows up, you know, as kids do, kind of like a little in opposition or a little like, I'm going to go do my own thing, right? So she grew up steeped in all this culture of organizing, but then she was like, I don't quite know what my calling is yet. I know my mom's not able to really create stability. And so I'm trying to figure this stuff out. But so I'm like, she's double socialized already in both the American experiment and the revolutionary reaction to that. So then when all the things get pulled out from under her, she's got to figure out like which parts of this are going to break down within me. And then who do I want to be? And it, you know, I love that part of the answer to that is like not alone. You know, she really tries on aloneness to an extreme degree, but then it's like, okay. And then when stuff starts breaking down inside of you, I also wanted to rebuild it very slowly. You know, I think a lot of times when people talk about like, you need to find your community, there's this idea that you're going to like drop into something that's already like a highly functional, multitudinous group of people who all have like working agreements and everything's going well. But that's not how I have ever built community. It's always been one by one and like letting myself be drawn into the companionship of one person at a time or one creature at a time. So that's the other part that felt important. Is like stuff is breaking down. And now you have all these people who are like, okay, we're all on the other side of this breakdown and it's breaking down inside of us in different ways. And so then when she finally is drawn to someone and it's like, I do want to go find that voice. I want to find this person. And, you know, it's someone else who society is breaking down inside of them as well. And together they're both like, well, maybe the ghosts matter. Like maybe the people who are dying matter. Maybe this place matters. You know, we're not sure yet, but we have some hypotheses that it matters to be here and be alive and be paying attention. And like, really, that's their only common ground at the beginning.
Well, I think it's crucial that Dune is, unlike her parents, not predisposed towards collectivity and organizing, but an introvert.
She's an introvert.
Yeah.
She wants to be by herself.
She's confronted with a rupture of intergenerational knowledge because of H8. Yeah. And we watch Dune learn to cook through books instead of from another person. We watch as she puzzles out, gleaning from various community gardens, as she starts to become an archivist of sorts about the disease by using her father's model of Detroit in their basement to record where she discovers people who have died, recording the seemingly nonsensical words each person keeps repeating when they're still alive but immobilized. She doesn't know if a pattern will emerge from her data.
Yeah.
She doesn't know if she will be the person to discover the pattern, if there is a pattern. But the act of archiving feels to me like something, at a minimum, she can leave for the future. But all along the way, what stands out to me in Grievers is how you dramatize dailiness, the unglamorous, quotidian acts of caretaking. She lives with her largely nonverbal elderly grandmother who depends upon her, and that dependence involves repetition, the wiping of butts, bathing another person's body, changing a diaper, without much gratitude in return. And along with her work learning to glean, to can preserves, and to cook, it is all work that's often feminized, that's considered feminine work that is usually deemed unworthy of being dramatized. But here you dramatize it. And it reminds me of the animating questions in Le Guin's carrier bag theory of fiction, how it was the male hunters who had their hunts glorified when they came back with a kill and then told their stories about the hunt, even when the meat was largely incidental to the survival of the people, which was mainly sustained by the work of women, not the hunting, but the gathering, an activity that was not seen worthy of story. But similar to how your story of quarantine Detroit doesn't center vigilantism and conflict, it also doesn't center heroism. It feels like you're showing how one could not only create a future archive around an unknown disease, but also begin to archive knowledge of how to live and survive through the act of doing it. I'd love to hear more about this aspect of Dune's life, and if there is indeed a philosophy underpinning what you're centering here, whether wiping a grandmother's bottom and wiping it again or gleaning in the fields.
Yeah, thank you. I love that you picked up on this piece, the larger piece, because back when I was in that Vona moment, that like 2013, 14 era, Octavia's Brood was bubbling up. Walida, Marisha, and I were starting to work on this collection of short stories from science fiction movements. And one of the things we talked about was to write fiction, there has to be some core conflict. And that's how all fiction exists. And I found myself really wondering about that. I'm like, what would it feel like to have a book where the motivating energy wasn't coming from conflict, but was coming from something else? And is it possible that that energy could be the will to live or the will to care or to become more tangible in what you're doing in your daily life? And Dune is someone who's been a wage worker. You know, she's not someone who's like, I've got this like massive purpose that I'm serving. She's very young and she's still figuring that stuff out, you know? So I was like, yeah, could I at least do this book? I think in the next books, I allow a little bit more of the conflict and there's some more dynamism going on. But in this one, I was like, well, really, how do you become a whole human being? And in my life experience, it's been that doula work, those doula moments, which inform a lot of emergent strategy as well, which is like, can I slow myself down enough to attend to the adaptation that's needed here? And am I willing to do whatever again, that work is that has been devalued? Like, can I, in this situation, it's like, there's no one else I can hire. There's not someone I can hire to come do this for me. There's not someone else. I think there's always the sense of community just beyond her reach, but she's unable to do that in her grief. She's not able to reach beyond the boundaries of the house initially. So then it's like, how much can happen inside of this world? And I've had so many caretakers. I've really got to be around and with and in the work of caretaking for so much of my adult life. And I think those are the best people I know, right? The people who, yeah, stay and they're like, I will do the act every day. And the listening to the repetition. This is one of the aspects of H8 survivors is a lot of them will have these words that they get stuck on repeating and they just keep saying over and over and over again. And in a way that's like some of it's sensical, some of it's nonsensical. But if you've ever been around, especially elder people who are on their path out, a lot of times they kind of whittle down to these like repeated interactions or repeated words or repeated memories. And it's like, these are the core gems of my life. This is the thing that, like, as everything else is passing away, I keep coming back to when I was sitting with Grace, when she was in hospice. She kept remembering her brother who had long been gone, but she kept remembering him as if he was there in the room with us and having conversations with him, conversations with her dead mother. And so yeah, I kept thinking about what are the essence, like I'm like, if this grief pulls us down to just the little crystallization that's left after everything, what are those stones, So there's something about being, can I just hold the stones and keep holding them and keep holding them and sitting with them and seeing if some pattern emerges from being with them? Can I be in the care and see if something emerges? And for Dune, it absolutely does, right? Like, she's not healed in some big, epic, magical way initially. Like, magic is definitely flowing through her, and we start to see that. But what's actually healing her is the repeated motion of care and being like, I'm the person who's going to stay in care. And it doesn't make me better or worse than anyone else, but it makes me a contribution.
Yeah.
And I love the moment when she has to start figuring out, like, that she has to care for herself as well. And, like, Grievers really closes with that moment of like, oh, like, I'm alive and I'm going to care for myself and I'm going to indulge and be good to myself. And, like, we'll see what happens from that. Hmm.
You mentioned recently in your newsletter some shows that you've really loved, and two of them were The Pit and Dying for Sex.
Yes.
I found The Pit incredibly grounding and therapeutic, which seems weird because everything is going wrong all the time.
All the time.
Misery and pain is the climate. But the way Dr. Robbie goes through this never-ending, unmanageable, and under-resourced situation and tries to remain human and to teach and to heal and to listen is just amazing.
Yeah.
And I think of that, and I also think of Dying for Sex's beautiful, unflinching ability to be with death and dying
Yes.
in all of its textures and nuances, including the beauty and the humor of it, but also the holiness of it, I think. I
Yeah.
can see why you love these shows in the way that you portrayed Dune, figuring it all out while losing everything she knows.
Yeah, absolutely. Like,
Yeah.
I really love watching I mean, the TV shows that will get me every time are the ones that are not positing that things are good or things are awful, but things are coexisting. Like, what it means to be human is to be with the full realm. Like, you're going to be grieving, you're going to be overcome by what humans are doing to each other. You're going to be overcome by how powerless we are in the face of trying to protect our loved ones. And some really sweet thing is going to happen, or some fucking hilarious thing is going to happen, or it's all going to be there at the same time. And both of those shows, I was like, I'm hooked, and I can't, I'm like, this is how I also want to be creating. I want to create worlds and people where folks are like, oh yeah, like, I can feel the humanity of that. Like, Dune is overwhelmed with grief, and then she's masturbating, and then she's going to figure out how to cook a cake or what, it's like,
Yeah.
she's just a person in a life. And, like, I think that grief, again, there's this way that would be like, oh, when someone loses someone, I think, sometimes we can pull away or be like, oh yeah, they've just got to be in their grief. Like, it's a busy thing, like a to-do list full of, no, I'm just sitting here crying. I'm sitting here crying, and, like, yeah, maybe it would be nice if someone came and sat on the porch with me for that and didn't ask me to be or do anything other than that. And then when we're sitting on that porch, we're probably going to laugh, and, like,
Right.
we might have a smoke, and we might, like, the humanity is always there. And I love thinking about some of the biggest laughter I've ever experienced has been at a funeral, in the after, in that you're building your plate of mac and cheese afterwards or whatever. And it's just like, oh yeah, remember the person that just died was also kind of like an asshole, but, like, we love them.
Yeah.
And remember when they did this thing to us, or, just, it all seems so beautiful in retrospect to look at a life and be like, oh yeah, like, this person did all these things, and, like, I just got to love that person, right? They don't go out with, like, some saintly halo over them. Like, no one really does. Everybody goes out like a person. So it was really beautiful to get to write this and have these people where, like, Dune Dune's mom is a hero to everyone else in Detroit. They all like respect and love her so much. But like most organizers' kids, they're like, oh my gosh, my mom's never
She's
got
never
her shit
around.
together. She's not around or whatever it is. I was just like, yeah, let's just have all that be here. Like her mom is an outstanding person who's also not a saint, and Dune is not a saint, and that she doesn't have to become one for the story to work. But she does have to be willing to be a little magical because that's also part of being human. It's like contributing to the magic of it all. I wanted all that in there.
Yeah. Well, one aspect of the books I really like are the occasional songs, and later in the trilogy, the ancestor journals.
Hmm.
The way we move into a different relationship to language when we encounter these other forms, it's a completely different reading experience. I think of how Le Guin's Always Coming Home has this too, and also has many songs, this you moving
Yes.
into different modes of language. In Grievers, Dune sings a song at one point that was particularly memorable, and two of the stanzas go, "What is the freedom road when all the warriors have gone home, when all the healers sleep alone? Who else will bear this load? How does the galaxy hold all this pain and not knowing, hold all this pain and keep glowing? Who am I meant to be?" In the aura of these lyrics, we have a question for you from the writer Daniel Alacron. He's the
Mm,
host of the Spanish language podcast Radio Ambulante. His
yes.
story collection, The King is Always Above the People, was longlisted for the National Book Award. And in 2021, he was the recipient of the MacArthur Genius Grant. So here's a question for you from Daniel.
Hey, hi, Adrienne. This is your old friend Daniel Alarcon. I'm so excited and honored to be a kind of remote participant in this interview that you're doing, and I have known you since 1997, so quite a long time, and I still remember the first time I saw you perform, like sing. It was pretty revelatory, and I knew you sang, and I knew you were, that it was a serious, that music was a really important part of your identity and your craft as an artist. But I had never heard you sing before, besides like, kind of like the kind of singing everyone does, you know, to, the radio or, at a bar when a song comes on. So this was the first time I heard you sing at a performance in New York. It was around this time of year. This is May right now. I'm sitting in the park. And I heard you sing, and it was beautiful. It was remarkable for me to sort of discover and appreciate my dear friend in a different light with a different set of talents that were kind of almost unimaginable to me, the way you would perform a melody and hit these high notes, and it was just very moving, and I was just so in awe. And so my question for you is about singing and about performance, and I'm just wondering how it intersects with your work as a writer, because I do feel like your writing has a certain lyricism, but I'm just interested in the relationship between those two art forms, writing and singing, and music and the written word. So I hope you can expand on that, and I can't wait to hear your answer. And I love you, and I'm super proud to be your friend. Take care.
Oh my God. It's so sweet. I love this. Like, this is your life thing. So, yeah, Daniel and I co-edited a magazine together at Columbia University called Roots and Culture. And he was a year ahead of me, I think, or two. But I just was always like, oh, he's the best writer I've ever met in my life. And I'm glad to know him. And yeah, so it's really beautiful to hear his voice. And yeah, I love this question. So, I think the truth about song for me is probably that that's the root system. Like actually the way things move through my body is melodies and lyrics and song. And when I'm singing, and what I love about singing, you don't need any words if you get the sound true. Like if you can really let a true thing come all the way up through you and out, like fill it up and through the lungs and get it out through your throat. And if it can still be true when it comes out, it doesn't matter the perfection of it. It just matters that it is so true. And when you hear something, or when you sing something, you're just like, this is it. I'm not contorting. I'm not shrinking. I'm just letting the full thing be here. It may sound very quiet. It may sound very loud, but it's just like, is it the real thing? And in some ways, it's much harder. It's much harder to like doing this project, writing across 3 books and being like, okay, there's a character and I have to build a world around this character and I have to have dialogue and there has to be all these other things. There's sometimes a part of me that's like, can I just sing Dune's song and everyone will just know what they need to know about it and like we can keep it moving. But then sometimes a song, I often will hear a song and be like, God, I wish I knew every single detail about that lyric. Like, where did it come from and who said it, who felt it? Like, it comes down to essence. Like poetry can sometimes come down to essence. And so then it's like, can I give myself permission? I loved with these books that I was like, let me just dance with going back and forth between them. And I liked that I wanted to make Dune a singer who wasn't like a performer singer, but she was just someone who was like, songs spill through me and I can use them to help people or comfort people. And the songs that came through here, my plan is still to record these songs and release them as their own little album project because they're all very distinct. They have, this one, what is the freedom road? When all the warriors have gone home, when all the healers sleep alone, who else will bear this load? Like, it's just like clear in my head. Like, this is how Dune sits and she just sings for her grandma or whatever. And when people are dying, a lot of times they'll ask to be sung to, or they'll have favorite songs they want to hear over and over again too. And it's this universal language. That's the other part for me about songs and music in general. Like I love being someone who, when I'll hear a song from Mali, or I'll hear a song from, China, or hear something and I'll be like, I don't know the words, but I know what this means. I know what this feels like. I understand it. Yeah, I feel like songs can take us beyond translation and then coming back into the realm of the stories. It's like, okay, now I've got to say something that like will need translation. And both things are really useful for the brain and for the human experience.
Well,
Yeah.
just hearing that little snippet, you feel, or I feel in my body, just how much more is coming from the song, where I don't even want to ask you more questions. I want to lay down and have you keep singing.
You want to lay down? I'll sing to you.
That's what I want. I mean, that's what it creates, that desire.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
feels like it's transmitting something that no matter how
Well,
much
and
conversation we have isn't being transmitted.
it's a different thing, right?
Yeah.
It's different. Like, I think there's a spirit in the song if you sing it right, if you get out of the way of it. And that's also taken some learning because like when Daniel saw me sing, I was taking voice lessons, I was studying song, and I was really learning like how vast, my voice could be, how big it, I had a voice teacher that I would meet up on the rooftop level at Barnard. And there was this like sort of greenhouse room where I could see all the way down the city. And she'd be like, sing it down to the Empire State Building, sing it all the way down, and I'd be like, like just really like, wow, whoa, how big can we go? But I trained, I really trained myself to sing. And then I kind of had to kick all that away because I had trained myself to sound very pretty, but it wasn't necessarily very truthful. Like I was like much more focused on how pretty the notes would be. And what I love about then the songwriting that has emerged later in my life has been like almost channeling, just like really giving myself over and being like, Spirit, come use my body and my voice right now. And I often find out how I feel about things because I just let myself sing and then something comes out. There's another song in this book that's I think too much about how I will die. And that song, like it came before I really understood that it went with this book and it just was looping. And I was like, this is my own suicidal ideation, literally looping through me and my own, the way I process the grief of being alive and recognizing how precious and incredible aliveness is in the world is, and then recognizing that there are people who don't feel that preciousness and that I will spend my whole life trying to be a voice of the preciousness up against this force of, you know, that numbness or that void, that emptiness, right? It's like I watched The Neverending Story at a formative moment in my life, and like I was like, the nothingness, it's like there's those of us who are like, I love being alive so much that I can barely speak and I can barely get my breath together. And it's just so beautiful. And song is the place where that can just flow through me. But also the grief of being like, yeah, I'm on this earth and like there's nothing I can do in my lifetime that will convince all the other people on this earth by the time I die to give themselves over to this beautiful life experience. Like that's grief feeling. I'm like, oh, I can't bring you all to the heaven that we live on. Like we live here. It's beautiful. But
Yeah.
part of the experiment of the Grievers Trilogy was like, can I make one pocket sacred and just show what that would look like and how it would sound? And so they're singing all the way to the very end of that.
Well, there's this scene that I think of a lot from the trilogy where the National Guard are wanting to evacuate people. There's already been a mass exodus and simultaneously a quarantine. And an organizer activist, Eloise, who's pissed about being told to go, says she won't leave until everyone can leave. But she also admits that she would be equally pissed if she were told she had to stay. Somehow this feels like a key to me. It's a scene that has me imagining into Eloise's history in Detroit, both the way Detroit has already been abandoned long before the plague, but also how Detroit, as you've mentioned, has already been doing intense solidarity work before the plague too. That perhaps the plague is amplifying something about Detroit in both directions. And I want to talk about Detroit, both by circumstance and ultimately by intention, becoming a maroon community, becoming this pocket where this song is sung, and what challenges it has because of this. But before we do that, first in the broadest strokes, I'd love to spend a moment about another shift that happens in mode from Grievers to the second book, Maroons. In the first book, as we've talked about, Dune is largely alone, and she's even mostly in her own head when she is with others. And it's a situation that in some ways suits her, but perhaps to a fault. And Maroons is a dramatic shift into the relational. And I wanted to talk about the various ways it becomes more deeply relational. The way Dune moves the trilogy into a much more deeply connected place is first by hearing a pirate radio broadcast and trying to find where it is coming from. And the show is called Everything Awesome Circus. And the host, Dawood, goes into these wild verbal riffs that, like the songs and like the ancestor journals in the book, they have their own syntax and they have their own style. So many of these broadcasts are really great. I think of one where he says, there are 4 things that matter. 1, looking into someone's eyes. 2, sleeping deeply enough to dream. 3, saying exactly what you mean. And 4, being creative. And when he says in his slant rhyme style, all I have really tried to do since I got here was plant seeds of joy and water them with laughter in the shadow of disaster, in the fucking cold. It reminded me of your recent appearance on Tananarive Dew's podcast, Life Writing, where you talked about how you love podcasts because of the way they feel related to radio, of hearing someone come into the room in this way. And I'd add that podcasts like pirate radio, but unlike broadcast radio, have no set form. An episode could be 30 seconds long, or like this podcast, 400,000 hours long. But here we are finding intimacy at a distance in this broadcast, storytelling, oral form. And I wondered either if you wanted to say anything about Everything Awesome Circus and the experience of writing it, or even perhaps there's a paragraph or 2 of a broadcast riff you'd want to read for us as part of that.
I think that I've mentioned before that all the characters in this trilogy are based on people who actually passed away during my time in Detroit. So they're people that I knew and they're people that I lost. And they're sketched after these people. So they're not like, this is the person, but it's like, oh, I want to honor, Dune really looks like this organizer named Shetty, who was the first people to ever pick me up from the airport with Jenny Lee. So Dawood is based on this poet named David Blair. And David Blair, one of the best poets that we've ever had, who passed away from a heat stroke in Detroit. But his poems were like mind blowing to me. And he was this bombastic, beautiful gay Black man who was just brilliant and and exacting. So when I was thinking about the Everything Awesome circus, I was like, I want something where someone is just leaning into being unhinged, is poetic, is like a little scared and a little alone, but also just like, we might as well fucking enjoy this. Like we're at the end of it all. And like, it's all there. So there's something about that, I was like, there's someone who's like, I could be serious and I could do all these kind of things, but like, I'm also, I don't know, I'm just figuring it out. Right. So I had the best time ever writing those sections, like really just letting myself be like, well, and I'm someone who like, I came up at an edge with spoken word where some people were like, yeah, really into spoken word. And other people were like, hell no, like, don't do spoken word, whatever. And I was like, I don't like, I think if I'd been born maybe a few years earlier, I might have just become like a spoken word poet and just gone that route. But this felt like it allowed me to play into that. So maybe I'll just read the first way we hear Dawood, and I'll see if I can get I used to have it very clear in my head, his rhythm. Welcome, welcome one and all, and I mean every single one of y'all, to the Everything Awesome Circus. Yes, absolutely named after the best movie of all time, the Lego Movie. It's so fucking wonderful to be here with you, each one of you, again, here in this small and seemingly empty but possibly and probably abundant place, this palace, this palatial place I still and now call home. If you can hear me, that means nearly nothing at all about you, you fucking feds. But you, yes, you, if you can comprehend, I mean truly integrate this wisdom and magic pouring through me, this cosmic conduiting then, no farce now, no shitting, there is no end to how amazing this day can be. This only day we have, this only moment that has no end except the constant end in that funky blend of reflection we call moonlight that comes every night. And these days with no man-made competition is so bright. It's nearly a fright. A beautiful fucking fright. Except on these silent killer new moon nights where there's not a solar reflection in sight. Now there are no babies here. But you and me, we know the worst things don't just come out at night. And I will tell you why. No lie. It's a fucking nightmare out there. Be one with the suffering of this real world, my friends. You have to see the grim shadow level of the inferno we face out there. It will not be denied. But in here, yes, in here, everything is truly and completely and totally awesome. It's a parallel universe of joy through reckoning. And I'm your host with the most in this sunset and dark matter ghost town where wonders abound and the good life can be found roughly anywhere.
So good.
He's so fun. I'm like,
He is.
he's just such a trip. And Detroit has all these characters who are so unique. Like just right now, like you go to Detroit. Every time I'm in Detroit, I'm like, there's someone I'll get in a conversation with, and I'm like, this conversation is unhinged from the rhythms of a normal social interaction. It's suddenly intimate and it's wide ranging and it's poetic and it's all the things. And it'll just be with like the Black man standing at the bus station or the person who's like driving your car or whatever. And Blair was like that, where like you'd ask him a question and the answer you would get would take you in a totally different direction, but it was a worthwhile divergence. I also, as a podcaster and a podcast listener and a radio, I'm like, I love the form of someone sitting alone and letting themselves fly into whatever realms they need to explore. And then putting that out there with the idea of, it's that message in a bottle move, right? That's like, I'm going to put this out there and we'll see what happens. And Dawood is like that, where he's like, I might be the only person actually left here. Like I came with the National Guard and they've kind of abandoned the project but I haven't found my family yet and I'm still here and I don't know if anyone else is out there. And Dune is like listening to him like, I didn't know anyone else was out there, but now that I know you're out there, I need to meet you.
Yeah.
And it was also important to me that like he not talk like that in real life. So it's like he has his show persona, Dawood B in the place to be, but then when she meets him, he's like this kind of curmudgeonly, gruff person. And that also feels very Detroit, right? It's like you'll have these people who are like doing whatever dynamic magic. And then when you meet them, they're just like, rah, rah, rah. And I'm like, great, these are my people. I love a good curmudgeon. poetic
Me
curmudgeon.
too. Well, extending your notion of something unhinged from social norms and staying with the relational shift in Maroons. Maroons is extremely sexual. Lots of sex portrayed in it.
Yeah.
And to me, it is the relationship between Dune and Dawood, not just sexually, but in every way, including the sexual, that feels like a decoder key to something you're exploring around creating relations as part of dreaming and otherwise into being, especially when the dreaming, by definition, isn't just your dream. So Dune and Dawood are both queer, but Dune dates other women and Dawood other men. But here they're creating a relationship where it isn't the normative society looking from the outside in calling their dating queer. It is queer to both of them from the inside, queer and strange in a way that challenges how they see themselves, that requires them to in some ways become unfamiliar to themselves. It almost feels like it's queer squared.
Yes.
It requires a lot of imagination, practice, experimentation, communication. And I want to read a lot into this relationship. Perhaps I'm reading too much into this relationship, but it is very clear that they aren't together in the end because of limited options, even if limited options may have forced them into a consideration of this in the first place. And I wonder if there is a subtext to this central relationship. We talked last time about fractals, about things mirroring and echoing each other at all scales, that if you want democracy in the world, you've often said, have you looked at how you conduct your own household? Have you started with the ways you are every day in the world? And I wonder if you're suggesting Dune and Dawood's relationship in a way as a small level fractal from which to move from to a larger scale love across difference.
Yeah, I absolutely am. To me, there's so much that has happened with identity that has made it almost impossible for us to love each other. I think the way we're meant to love each other, because some identities have chosen to focus on domination and other identities have had to then focus on surviving the domination. And so then within ourselves, we can get very like hierarchical, even if we don't mean to. And I remember when I first realized I was queer, it wasn't like I like girls and now I only like girls. It was actually like an unhooking from rigidity. It was like, oh, I can like anyone. Like I can really feel attracted to anyone. Like the things that people tell me are supposed to matter here are not the things that matter to me. Like I would find myself having a conversation with someone who there's a huge age difference or there is a cultural gap that like I remember having a talk with a priest one time and being like, this priest is so attractive, like there's so much chemistry that's happening here and I don't want to act on that, but I just am like, that's just real. There's just is really this a feeling here, and society says there wouldn't be. So I also have read so many post-apocalyptic things where people are just kind of thrown together and they end up just like casually having sex with someone or hooking up or whatever. And just being like, I don't know, you're the only person here, I guess. We have to fucking survive. And there was something about these people who are like, their primary love for both of them is Detroit, right? The primary relationship that both of them have chosen to be in is to be in Detroit, to stay there and to stay surviving there, even at the risk of madness, at the risk of not surviving, at the risk of losing agency or losing, if Dune, particularly for the first part of it, she's like, if I get caught, they're going to just send me away from home and I'll have nothing at all left. So they're both in this primary relationship to Detroit, which I think automatically decenters what would normally be their way of relating to each other. And then I liked the element of surprise for both of them, which I have experienced before in my life where I'm like, I didn't expect to feel attracted or drawn to you, but think I love you. And maybe that will be physically manifested. Maybe it'll be something else, but like, I love those moments when it's like love is starting to emerge here and it's emerging where I was told I wouldn't. And that to me always feels like the queerest thing we can do is to see possibility where we were told there is none and to see like, oh, I already am something I was told can't exist. Like to be queer for most of us, at least in this time, is to be like, I was never given this as an option. I was told it was bad. I was told I would be punished. And yet I just already am that. And so I have to figure out how I want to live with that. And I think for both of them, they're able to slip outside. Again, this is the breaking down the society inside ourselves. It's like they're both able to, you know, without a lot of fanfare. That's the other thing I like about them is not, they're not like, oh my God, this is, they're just both like, you're kind of giving hot right now. It's like, I don't know. I'm just really like, I want to spend my time with you. And I wanted that, I think this is one of the lessons that Octavia offered us is in her stories, people fall in love even in the apocalyptic condition. And there's something compelling that makes them want to move forward. Like there's something on the other side of the collapse. And it's love, right? Like loving the earth and loving each other. That's what's on the other side of letting go of these systems that tell us they're taking care of us, but they don't actually allow us to truly love each other the way we want to. To live in the US right now is like, I love you and I won't be able to protect you from the state. I won't be able to protect you from the police. I won't be able to protect you from poverty. I won't be able to make sure you get the health care you need. Loving is like such battle. And I wanted to show that, like, if you remove a lot of those structures, then love can just be love. It can just be like, I've got something I want to offer you. Do you want to receive it? Do you want to give back anything? Do we want to build something together? And each decision that they make feels very like organic. Like there's no one pressing the other person. No one is like, I'm the top and you're the bottom of this dynamic, which also felt like trying to reimagine relationships between men and women, where you have removed those assumed dominant, submissive relationship. Remove that part of it also felt exciting to me. And then I really wanted to explore just for myself, like, could I write sex scenes between them that would feel sexy to lesbians, sexy to gay men, and sexy to hetero people? Like how sexy could it get? And so far, the feedback has been really good on that. Alexis DeVoe reached out to me. She was like, "Yeah, I would get with Dawood," and she's like the oldest like the lesbian I know. So I was like, "Okay, cool." I think we're in good. Like I wanted him to be someone that I was like, "This is a man that I could imagine sleeping with." But the dynamic between them, like neither of them has to give up who they are or the sex they like or the love they feel. It's like whether the sex you could, I hope that you can feel like the sex could come and go, but the love relationship between them is core. And it's like in relationship to Detroit. And you've read Octavia's work. So she has the Uloi, that alien species that comes and it becomes like a third between the humans. Mm-hmm. There's a way for me that Detroit was like that a little bit with them. Like, at least in my mind, it's like they both love the city and they're not going to leave the city. And so that becomes the third part of their tripod. And I find that when people love each other and they're place-based, or they're like, we both love the same places, or we both love the same kind of places even, it creates this other third leg of solidarity in their relationship. So I wanted to show all of those different things, but I love their togetherness. It makes me really happy.
Well, it was hard to know where to place this next question from another because it could be anywhere in the interview, but also because where it is placed might change how you answer this question. Because one way I view the trilogy's movement, and I have no idea if you'd agree, which is, I think, a fractal relationship between the three books, is that Grievers involves more isolation and individuation, Maroon's more relation and chosen families, and Ancestors more questions of larger collectives and solidarities, both horizontally in the contemporary moment, but also vertically across time and perhaps space-time.
Yeah.
So I decided to place this question sort of in the middle of the arc of our conversation instead of decidedly in one of these modes. And this question is from the poet, the Arab American Book Award-winning novelist and psychologist Hala Alyan. Alyan's latest book is a memoir. It released this month called I'll Tell You When I'm Home. Past Between the Covers guest Kava Akbar says of it, I'll Tell You When I'm Home feels as rich and supersaturated as contemporary consciousness itself. I can't stop talking about it. And current Between the Covers guest Adrienne Maree Brown says she wants her readers in the wound with her, inside the stories that don't get told enough, inside the body-mind of a displaced woman struggling to create something bigger than herself. Brilliant.
Yeah.
So here's a question for you from Hala.
I'm going to cry. Okay.
Hi, my beloved. It's Hala. First of all, congratulations. Alf Mabruk. My question unsurprisingly, is around care. I think you've done such tremendous, beautiful work for so many of us, thinking about and inviting us to think about it, care as such an essential, central part of capacity building and endurance building. And I sort of have two questions for you. The first is, how did you think about care while you were working on this specific project in this specific time, in the time that it was being written? So for this book, what did this particular story call for, in terms of care, in terms of what was your system kind of craving during this time, and how did you find it? And then I'm curious about whether the writing itself felt like a form of care. Was this, there are some projects that, I don't think drain is the right word, but there are some projects that, exact a toll, but their telling is necessary and their writing is necessary. And then there's some projects that just feel, at least for me, that have felt really kind of regenerative and sort of delicious, and like that is its own form of care, and that's its own form of reprieve. So I'm curious if you can speak a little bit about that. Love you.
Oh, I love Hala. This is so good. Hala is such an incredible writer
She
and an
really is.
incredible human. She and I have been building like a deep friendship over this past 2 years. And yeah. Anyway, so beautiful questions, Hala. I would say care is such a major character of this book. Like in some ways, it's kind of a care adventure book or something. Like I really am like, I I hope that one of the things people notice in the book is that almost everyone is driven by care. Like everyone who survives is someone who their orientation was like, who am I going to care for? Like, how am I going to care for myself? And then who else am I going to care for? So it's a really big part of the storytelling of the book, like wanting to model also what different kinds of care look like. Like some people almost always go first to community care. So Eloise is like that. There's these women who are like, we've got a farm, we've got eggs. There's different people who are like, we're figuring stuff out for a larger group. And that's one of the things that emerges over the course of the book is like her mom was actually involved in helping plan for the care of a post-crisis Detroit. Like care is woven throughout, but that there are different ways to do it. And so for some people, the care that they're offering is that intimate hospice care or internal home care, whatever. And then for some people, it's this larger thing. I think we judge each other so harshly right now for where we choose to put our care. And we actually politicize it and romanticize and do all these weird things where it's like, if you're doing a massive organization or a massive volunteer effort or something like that, you're like, I'm really caring. But then I'm like, I know so many people who are like in a house every day wiping someone's butt or like helping them get in and out of the bath or helping a child understand how their mind maybe works different from the kids in their class. Or there's just so many really sweet, intimate places where like care is happening. And there's some kind of connective tissue between learning to care for one person really well, even if that person is yourself, and then being able to provide care and be part of a culture or a society of care. So I think one of the crises we're in right now is that people don't really know how to care for themselves without withdrawing from the human project. It's like, I'm going to go away from everybody and there I will care for myself. And then I'll return to this reckless, careless, dangerous
Yeah.
society and like survive until the next time I can do that. So it felt important to me to be like, whatever happens next is rooted in care. And it's not just the care of the humans for each other, but also the earth, the city of Detroit is sentient in this set of stories. And it wants to also care for its people, which leads us to the second part of the question that Hollow was asking, where this book was a very healing journey for me to take. It was like give myself a fractal microcosmic experience of my deep grief about the world and how Black people are treated and how anyone we determine to be underclass is treated, how women are treated, how disease gets responded to, how place is not cared for. Like there's all these things that are all swirling inside of me as the grief of being a human who wants so much better for us. And I think I let my grief, like I really let myself be in grief with Dune in that first book, but in my own way. I'm a dissociator. So like I will grieve by making something. I will grieve by planting something. I will grieve by cooking something, you know, it's rare that it's just like sitting somewhere crying, but I needed to give myself the care of like writing a character who just gets the full room. And then the rest of it is like, okay, like what is a society I could imagine wanting to participate in? I always get so I always feel so disingenuous when people are like, yeah, and it's like this utopia and like everyone lives in the one house and like everyone takes care of each other's everything and like, you know, and I'm like, you know, the I can feel the claustrophobia that comes with most people's vision of utopian society. And I always feel bad. Like I'm like, am I too capitalized or you know like what has happened to me is something broken that makes me not want to be all up in the collective all the time. But then writing this book was like caring for someone like me who's like I don't want to be around a billion people all the time, but I do have something to offer. And maybe I could be a leader, maybe I could cast a spell, maybe the love that I make, maybe the song that I sing for my dying elder, like maybe these are the ways that I can legitimately weave myself in. And so I felt like I was caring for myself as the book went along. But when it came to ancestors, that's when I really was like, okay, what is my greatest wish truly for what happens here? And I think for anyone, like it is a very caring question to ask yourself. It's like, what is my greatest wish? What is my greatest hope? What is my deepest vision? Like, what would healing actually look and feel like? And I have to say, I went and sat by the Eno River because I was kind of stuck. I had been writing and writing, and I just felt stuck. Everything was still happening inside this boundary of the city that had grown up, and the river was like, you have to let go of utopia, or you have to make it so that everyone can be there. Figure it out.
Yeah.
And it was so healing to write the third book with that as my instruction. Was like I either have to like let go of the boundary that's keeping them all safe or have to make it possible for everyone to be here. And like how would I write that? How would I do that? And it felt like such self-care to do that writing. And now I feel like I have much more clarity. Like when I think about emergent strategy and pleasure activism and these ideas, I'm like, oh, now I understand more how to bring them into the world through these pockets of deep practice and these pockets of like really being yourself authentically in the practices. As I finished, I had the same feeling I had when I finished writing emergent strategy, which was like, okay, that's like that's a way. That's a definite way. You
Well,
know?
everyone should hold in their minds what the river spoke to you because we're moving towards that question slowly but surely in this conversation. I did want to mention just one other thing around care or less obvious forms of care that I really loved, which was Dune's working through periodically and intermittently in the three books her own shame and difficulties around her changing body.
Yeah.
So her body's changed. Her diet has obviously changed. Her activities have changed. It's unrecognizable to the way she used to be. And she's having to work through a lot of her own internalized biases around what this body is and how to be sexual in this body. And I don't know if we connected to this, but there's also scenes late in the book with an older mentor who's never been held or seen as a sexual being as an older person. And it feels somehow related, them both
Yes.
working through this self-conception and how to move through the world and how to release some things about a way they might be being viewed.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. We live in a very fat phobic world, and I have read so many stories where as somebody lands in themselves and really truly becomes themselves that they get fit and they get, you know, more whatever healthy in ways that the universe like has decided are the good ways. And so I really wanted to have a protagonist where actually the healthier she gets, the softer, the fatter, the like yeah, she just gets softer. Everything about her gets softer physically. And so she, you know, as a tomboy in that queer world, she would have been someone who was sort of like a rip stud, you know, like she's like, I work out and I'm always naturally skinny. Like that's been her body type all along. And then as the pandemic unfolds, her grief, she's eating her grief and then she's eating everything else. Like she can't stop just consuming and comforting herself with food. And that's playing out all the way through the story that we're watching her like eat and eat and eat. And at one point, her ancestors are like, you know, trying to figure out how to help her. And they're like, she's eating for all of us. And that's how one of the ways that I have understood my own journey with my fatness is like I'm trying to comfort like the whole world through what I'm giving my body in these dissociated moments, but then also then come into relationship with like, well, this is my body and this is the body that has been shaped by my grief. And how can I love it and still experience pleasure here and maybe experience more pleasure because I have set aside the part of me that is super connected to like how everything looks and if it looks like it does on TV or if it looks like it does in a magazine. It's just like, no, it looks like a human body and that I'm looking at another human body that I want to be with or more or whatever. So then having the elder character, I also want to explore, and I want it to be a little messy with it, like these relationships that happen where in some ways it's like the body is the least necessary part of it. It's like, oh, we're going to be, we're in bodies. So body is going to be a part of this, but actually what's happening is this larger spiritual dance or this spiritual work and this the both and of that. And when we first meet that elderly character, she feels unreachable. Like she doesn't feel like someone you could have intimacy with. And I think about so many women in my life, particularly women, all genders really, but so many people who they go so long without being touched properly and being touched with desire and being touched as a human that it begins to reshape the whole personality and the whole sense of what humans are capable of. Like we're meant to be touched and we're meant to be felt desire and chemistry and connection. And so I was like, everyone thinks she's a mad woman, and maybe she is a mad woman, but like, what would it do for her to really be touched and desired and to see herself that way again? And what can Dune, Dune's learning off of this woman's body because she's not the kind of teacher who's like, here's how you do this. She's just like, come on, follow me. We're going off to do magic now. And I was like, what will it do for Dune to like actually get to be in this experience with her and help both of them have a liberating experience? I was also exploring some of my poly things there because it's important to me in the story that even if people are drawn towards each other, gravitate towards each other, that in this new world, like no one owns each other and people have to reckon with their need for like exclusivity and they have to reckon with their, it's like things are just more complicated. We're all surviving in a very small space and we all somehow, whoever's here has to give each other all that we need to give each other. So I can love you, but I also do need to give this person pleasure. And that's the natural organic thing between us. And I also need to give this person intimate support. And I also need to go pray with this one. And like, what does it mean to be with someone who I'm like, oh, I don't own you and you don't own me. And so whatever you need to do, whatever relationships you need to have them. And then let's be in integrity with each other. And a lot of the tension of the final book is trying to navigate that of like, okay, we're both free, but we're also both in love. And like, how do we fight the socialization of what being in love means for free people? And I thought that having her hook up with her teacher was a nice, complex little like testing ground, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this is not the threat you were imagining was going to be coming to our relationship, but like somehow that's what happens. And I also like that was it was like we did what we needed to do and now it's complete. Because I wanted to show that like even in the apocalypse, it's not like, well, now that we're getting together, we just have to get together forever. It's like, no, we get together for the time we need to be together. And then now that piece is done and keep on moving. Yeah.
Let's talk about Detroit as a Maroon community. I wondered if you were inspired by certain specific Maroon communities. It made me think of many things myself that weren't Maroon communities necessarily, but felt connected in some way. For instance, it made me think of when I went to Cuba in the early 90s, not knowing I was going during what is now called the special period, just after the collapse of the Soviet Union and Soviet support of Cuba, when things were in many ways at their most dire moment. There were rolling blackouts, gas shortages, and more. And when I traveled around with a Cuban doctor who I met by chance there, we would bring suitcases of rice and beans with us as we visited as family members on the island so that when they cooked for us, they weren't using their own rations. And there were a lot of other outright terrible things, like I never forgot the use of pages of books for toilet paper, for one. But more than all the challenges, I remember all the resourcefulness, all the creative responses, large and small, that Cubans were doing to get through. The Maroon community in Detroit also made me think of my first conversation with Dion Brand, where we revisited the year that she moved to Grenada in the early 80s to join the revolutionary government, and how this island that was no threat to anyone, that had nothing to threaten anyone with, materially, was invaded and disposed of. And according to Noam Chomsky, it was eliminated because of the example that it posed, that their imagining and otherwise was the real threat. And I also think of the Saul Williams movie, Neptune Frost, a musical. Yeah. Have you seen it?
I love that movie.
I love that movie. A musical that feels simultaneously ancient and science fictional, that is told in this mix of French, Swahili, English, Kinyarwanda, and Kurundi, that centers the most forgotten and unregarded people, the African peoples mining trace minerals for our phones and computers, and also the ways they reject the gaze in that movie, creating something that feels deeply sovereign and radical from within. Even suggesting, I think, that if they find liberation, if liberation could start there, if these people could be seen equal and could live with dignity, we could find the whole world being liberated as a result. But I wondered what your inspirations for Maroon Detroit were. Did it intersect with historical examples of lived examples or from examples from art or literature or more?
Yeah, so I love the examples you just gave. So my brain is like running around to Cuba and Neptune Frost everywhere and being like, at Grenada. I'm like, I love each of those stories and thinking about how when you're inside of it, that resourcefulness, that sovereignty is the thing, that makes it worth having opted out of the world that we're told is more desirable than this, right? And I think about Ursula K. Le Guin's The Dispossessed is one of my favorite ideas of like, we're going to steal away and put ourselves somewhere else. But Detroit, when you live there, when you're from there, calls itself up south, right? There's so many people migrated there during the Great Migration who had been enslaved people and then made their way up to Detroit. And so the culture is this like really beautiful blend of all this northern getting through the cold and figuring stuff out and indigenous culture with like all these southerners who are like, okay, we're up here. And I was thinking of very specific Southern Maroon communities and how Southern Maroon communities were often in swamps, that it was like, we have made our way away from the plantation. There's actually nowhere that we know of, because I think we forget that like, if you were born and raised on the plantation, your idea of the world beyond it might only be rumor. Like you might not have actually ever seen anything else, been anywhere else, or heard from someone who was like, we've successfully made it somewhere else. So you might only go as far as the swamp, and just be like, okay, it seems like we can hide in here. And then a lot of the other elements feel familiar. Like we don't have a home, but we know this landscape. We know what grows here. We know these things. So I got really inspired by those Maroon communities. I read about Maroon communities in Jamaica, where the sort of initiation of this way of talking about Maroon communities comes from. And just this idea of finding a place where people think that doesn't feel livable, that doesn't feel hospitable to the ways we have developed our thinking on like where humans live. And when I moved to Detroit, that was so much the energy. Like I literally had a lot of people like, you're moving to Detroit? Like I always thought you would go live on the ocean or someplace really, really physically beautiful. And like, because people who know me, I'm like, I love the sun. And I'm moving to Michigan, which has the most cloud cover of any state in the country for the year. Like folks are like, why would you go to Detroit? Isn't it awful there? Kind of was the implied thing. The fact that like after the auto industry pulled out the economy from Detroit, that there were Black communities that chose to stay there and survived by creating these community gardens and creating these networks of community policing and justice, and found a way, they say made a way out of no way. Like Detroit has already been a Maroon community in a way. It's already been a place where like Black people survive when no one else wants to be there, and have made it so compelling that now it's like a hot spot that people want to come and gentrify, right? So I think that was all deep inspiration for me, was the sense of like, how can we pull on the Southern roots and the Southern practice of Maroonage and the diasporic practice of maroonage. And then the part that I wanted to add in there was like, and what if the earth partnered with us in this maroonage, which may have happened in every single case. I don't know because I wasn't there, and people don't really write about like, and it felt like the swamp welcomed us, or it felt like, like it's like this was hard, but I'm like, every place I've ever lived where I started to pay attention to the earth, it paid attention back to me. And I've always felt cared for by the earth that I lived on. The whole time I lived in Detroit, I was like, this city is so vibrant and alive. And I think there's a spiritual portal or something happening there. And so, yeah, I wanted to explore that and just be like, well, what would it feel like if this became a maroon space? And what would make it safe enough to be a maroon? If it's a city that everyone knows the landscape, like this is the skyline of Detroit. Can you make that a maroon place that no one knows is there anymore? And I love that idea of like, yeah, how do we maroon where we are?
Well, on the Push Black podcast, in an episode called Why Black Imagination is a Blueprint of Liberation, you call Wakanda the ultimate maroon community. You don't know Wakanda is there unless you know it's there. You can't get in unless you are given the means to get in. And for sure, this is true for what becomes of Detroit in your narrative. And I wanted to use that as a step toward talking about magic and ritual, which exists, like all the themes we've discussed so far, in every book in the series to varying degrees, but which is most pronounced and comes to full fruition in Ancestors. I think of the lines from the Book of the Living in the parable of the sower that go, all successful life is adaptable, opportunistic, tenacious, interconnected, and fecund. Understand this, use it, shape God. This feels like a great description of the magic in your books, which doesn't come from a single identifiable source. We can say that it involves Dune, but also involves what her father has left for her, the model of Detroit, but also literally involves her mother's cremains. And yet it isn't based on any sort of recipe or ritual conducted by a given person, as what seems to animate it, even if it requires all these ingredients, perhaps, these ingredients of lineage, inheritance, ancestry, and more, is the plant world in its own way, perhaps like you're suggesting the swamp welcoming a maroon community. But this plant world with its own agenda, distinct from Dune, but not independent from her. Whatever alchemy is happening is collaborative across species, but also across time. And I also think of when you were talking with Kiesi Lehman about Grievers, when you said that what always came up for you in your emergent strategy gatherings were the need for rituals of grief. And whatever magic arises in this book, in these three books, feels also inseparable from grief and death. Both the archival work of Dune and the model itself of Detroit move as the trilogy progresses from an accounting of and a mapping of disease to an accounting of and a mapping of power and strength. And of course, a model is an act of representation itself, which makes me think of how this might also apply to the magic and the power of art making. There are also other aspects of magic and ritual. The channeling that happens in the book, the tarot reading, which begins with the card Death and ends with the Ten of Cups, a card of abundance, and the line in Ancestors about the, quote, unseen thickness of existence. So I just wanted to pause and spend a moment about the unseen thickness in the trilogy, or about ritual or ritual magic in the Grievers Trilogy.
Thank you. I love how you weave everything together. You're such a good collage artist. So I wanted to give room for people like myself who come to the magic and the ritual work somewhat haphazardly because of a need, and not because someone like picks you out and says, come with me, I'm going to apprentice you to become this. I have been a generalist spiritually. Like I've tried out so many different things, and I'm really interested in the patterns that come over and over again. So things that I would notice would come up over and over again and would naturally occur to me were moving people into a circle, were giving people room to feel what they needed to feel, and like not putting a time limit on the emotion, being in spaces where people were collectively emoting and seeing how we can go further together sometimes than we can just go on our own. And then being in these private ritual spaces where more and more I learned to just trust that I'm like, if I just open the channel within myself, which literally just say, I'm like, I'm open, I'm available, I'm getting myself present. Is there anything that I'm supposed to hear right now? I'm supposed to know right now? Like learning to do that and then trusting what came. I was like, oh, spirits are really quite rambunctious and communicative, and as is the living world. So I would get such clear direction that was like, start singing right now, or go light this candle, go get your tarot deck, journal something. Here's a poem. I will often wake up and here's a fully formed thing that you're supposed to share with the world today. Like just very clear stuff, right? So I wanted to give space for Dune to have an organic spiritual practice that drew on different things she's been exposed to, like her mother's Orisha practices and other practice. I was like, I want her to be in relationship to the world that's at intersections of spiritual practices, and then have her own organic awakening. And then the earth felt like such a big piece of it that so often I think people, we've gotten into all these very formalized institutional structures for how spirit happens and who determines goodness and who tells you, like, here's what you need to do to be in right relationship with God. But I'm like, I grew up in a story that I was made in the image of God. And then I started to learn about the earth and I saw so much twinning. I was like, oh, I'm made in the image of earth. And if I was made in the image of God and I am obviously made in the image of earth, and I think earth might be the holiest place and the holy being that we're all in relationship to. And that excited me so much and it liberated me so much because everyone has access to the earth. Like everyone has access to some small portion of it. And well, let me correct that. Everyone should have the right to the earth. And because we're all here, there's something I said to my sister recently that was like, we all have a line of gravity that has our name on it and that is like holding us, committed to holding us. And so that might be our little portion. But I think we're all meant to have a square, meant to have a plot, meant to have a field, meant to have space on this earth to be and to do magic. And I have had the experience over and over of walking outside or going outside in my grief and suddenly experiencing the comfort of the natural world, whether it's like, oh, that butterfly just flew up and I know that that's my friend, or this bird just landed and I can feel my grandmother in her song, or I'm overwhelmed by a storm and I'm soaked and I'm drenched. And it's just like, be humble, like life is a downpour, life is a drought. It's all the things. And like, the magic when you start to tune in and be like, maybe I'm a part of this huge, complex system of interdependence. It feels like magic. And if I let that in, it suggests to me that I'm also part of this interdependent system and that I might be part of the magic for something else or someone else. Like in the same way that I'm like, that cardinal might not know that it's being a part of my comfort, right? Like it's being a cardinal, but the way it's showing up and the timing of it lands in the system of my life as a comfort. And so, can I let myself be similarly used? And so, a lot of what's happening with Dune in this book is trying to play with that kind of magic where I'm like, Dune, rather than becoming a master witch or a master healer, can you just be available for the moments when nature needs to use you to heal? And that's what Mama Rue is trying to teach her to do. It's like Mama Rue, people see her as a madwoman, but really it's like she's in such a deep discipline to something beyond these existing systems. And all she really cares about is the next instruction she's getting from those ancestral guides and voices. It's like, now you go do this. And she's like, Dune, your gift is similar. Like any healer's true gift is similar to this, which is, can you just be available when we need to pour through you to help this person out or help this creature out or help this world out? And I wish that more people's orientation towards being alive was that. And I wish people's orientation towards being spiritual was just like, can you be available for the miracle that wants to use you to be in right relationship with itself? That's what we're all here to do. And I think by the end of the book, you've gotten to see that from the indigenous community. You've gotten to see that from Mama Rue. You've gotten to see that from Dune. You've gotten to see that from Dawood. Like everyone in a different way is being used by the city to make the city something new. And the city then becomes this like beautiful spiritual entity of place that is like a fractal of the earth. And what they figure out in Detroit can be applied to anywhere. And that excites me too.
Yeah. Well, we're finally to the thing that I'm most excited to talk to you about, which is the thing that's most centrally placed in the third book, Ancestors, which is collective organizing.
Yeah.
There are definitely interpersonal stressors in the books, like Dawood is from the National Guard, which is super hard for Dune and creates mistrust within the new community they are joining. And I think of your own military family background as you dramatize this. And there are some major questions about, which you've alluded to already, about love and commitment and desire, where desire exceeds the boundaries of normative relationship agreements and the fallout and negotiation around all of that.
Yeah.
There's also occasionally people not using the right pronouns or some regressive gender politics. And I definitely think about your books, We Will Not Cancel Us and Loving Corrections in light of this. But what I'm thinking about here more are questions of decision-making and governance in Ancestors on a larger scale. Because different subcultures are discovered within Black Detroit, each with their different ways of doing things, but also other non-Black communities of color who are also dreaming new futures too. On the upside, I think of my recent conversation with Leanne Batasamosake-Simpson about her model of sintering, which is when snowflakes fall onto a snowbank when it's below freezing. And it's different than melting. Each snowflake deforms a little bit to sinter with its neighbors, but it remains its distinct self. And sintered snowbanks endure much longer than unsintered snow. But I also think about my own experiences with activism, which I've been doing since I was a teenager, whether thinking about affinity groups I've been in or simply my interfacing with cooperatives or with radical community radio or various groups I was a member of locally and otherwise. Because some of the most wildly dysfunctional and terrible experiences I've had have been in groups who, on paper, have espoused ideals and methods that were the ones I most agreed with. Dune is thrust into an organizing role that was better suited to her mother. And as a member of the council, Dune notices how the energy changes on the council, even with people she likes individually when they're away from it. That behavior and speech changes in ways that she's questioning, perhaps questioning even the form of how these decisions are being made.
Yeah.
It is described at one point as the frustration of the theoretical crowding into the material. And there's also the line elsewhere in the book, quote, "This was the aspect of collective process that had always kept her from fully committing to the groups her parents created and gave their lives to, the sense of having to deny the obvious in the name of consensus." When I read this, all the utterly maddening moments I've had in those settings immediately flash before my eyes. So I guess I just wanted to hear more about you and this, because I feel like you're not dissing this process. I feel like this process is essential. It's super important. And yet I also think it's maddening somehow at the same time. And I would love to hear you speak a little bit about this, which you spend quite a lot of time in her ambivalence around trying to participate in this community, wanting to pull away and do something different than council work. Could she just go and work in the farming sector of the city, do something else and be as important?
Yeah, I appreciate all of this. I think you could definitely see my own experience coming through in this, where I'm just like, in the 25 years where facilitation was my primary work in one way or another, the thing I often felt I was working against was the lowest common denominator agreement, and feeling like, okay, we got consensus, but nobody is enthusiastic about the thing we got consensus about. It's just the thing that least offends the most people. And I'm like, that's not what we need. We need something where we get passionate and we make some mistakes even, but like some people are able to move with some passion, and like we figure something new out. So I imagined, I was like, oh yeah, if they came together in this council, and I'm again thinking of people that I've known and lost in Detroit, and thinking about Detroit organizing, I'm like, people are not going to all get along. And there's this dynamic that can happen in meetings where it's like, are we meeting or are we performing? Like, what's actually happening here. And because I can do either, and I think an organizer often is like that person who's like, I can go either way. Like I can either have a great meeting with you, or I can just like give a speech or give it, do something that's really not connected to you at all. So I wanted to just name it. I'm like, that happens. And then how would someone like do navigate it? And how do we give people room to navigate it? Because there are people who I'm like, there are people who love group process and we need a lot of it. Like, we do need people who are able to be in meetings. And part of why I've done so much work around facilitation is because I'm like, we need people who are willing to help hold meetings and help hold the ground of togetherness. But I love that her elders are able to look at her and be like, yeah, your gifts, like there's something you can offer to this space, but maybe there is an adjustment or an adaptation that allows you to give your gifts here. And I so often wish that was the way we were doing movement, that instead of being like, everyone has to come to this meeting every single time and hear all that, I'm like, is that the best use of everyone's time? Or are there some people who are like, I don't need to come to the meeting, but you can count on me to do this, this, and that. Or like me and my team will do these things or whatever. So the collective organizing process here, I wanted to have it feel very intimate and small. Like it's like we're building a new society, but it's happening with like this handful of people that and that the rest of the city is kind of trusting to like be council. The aspects of this that felt really helpful to me were the fact that it was a transparent council. I think one of the places where it's the easiest to get off course from collective accountability is when we're holding sessions where it's like everything is top secret. And I've been in these meetings where like, all top secret. And I'm like, I get security needs for that sometimes, but most of the time it's not that deep, especially if you're supposed to be in service of a community. I'm like, the community should be able to walk in and out of the door or walk past. So the idea of having these meetings like in open atriums or other places where people could come and they could see. And it turns out like not a lot of people are interested in coming by or seeing or being a part of it, but just they know they could. That felt important to me. And then the option of being able to be like, can I opt out? And watching Dune realize like, do I want to opt in or opt out? And that there is a choice here. That felt important to me. Because we live in the world we live in now where capitalism is king, everyone feels like they have to be so productive, like a constant entrepreneur. And you all have to kind of learn it's like we all have to learn a certain set of skills to like run a business or promote ourselves or whatever, just to do anything, like anything you want to do. You're like, I'm great at podcasting. Okay, well, what's your business model? What? I'm a podcaster. Why don't you need a business model? Right? Just this idea that like everyone has to do it the same way. I really wanted to break us out of that and be like in Maroon Detroit, in this beautiful space, the Murmur City that we've made. People all actually do get to be different. And then the way we figure out the structure is based on form following function, like everyone actually doing their different jobs and being different. I could have gone a lot further with that, but I didn't want to, it would have required much deeper dives into a couple of the other characters that I may do spin-off stories or something for them sometimes. Muhammad, there's a few people that I'm like, I'd really like to deeper dive into that person, but it didn't feel like it was the right place yet. But yeah, this idea that like, I dream of, which I think is somewhat anarchist, somewhat Buddhist, somewhat socialist, but there's this place where it's like, could we all do what we're called to do, trusting that some people are called to be the council and that the people who are called to be the council have to figure out how they do that in a way that is not a waste of time.
Yeah.
And
that's great. Well, one positive modeling of collectivity is ecological. They call themselves not Motor City, but Murmur City after the murmurations of starlings.
Yeah.
There's emerging wildlife in the city and in the model of the city also. The collaborative magic between the plant and human world. Even a really beautiful scene where they sing to the fish they are farming, acknowledging the ways the conditions for the fish in the short to mid-term are suboptimal and not what they should be, that these fish are not living truly fish lives before they're farmed. But the collective of human, plant, ancestor, and more is also involved in making Detroit a Wakanda, unenterable unless it wants to be, which sets up sort of an inverse dilemma to that earlier in the trilogy when Eloise admits that she would be pissed if told to leave and pissed if told to stay. At this point, people have been living in the city successfully. They've survived for 3 years. And you could ask, and people do, why does it need to be more than this? This seems like a completely valid question. Couldn't it just be this forever, the way it is? It's working. it's ongoing, it's sustaining itself.
Yes.
This contained, enduring maroon pocket, which are so rare. But there is this looming question of whether the people are free if they can't leave through the magical wall that keeps people from coming in. And the question of whether the wall in the first place, which seemed necessary to allow any of this to happen in the first place, when the military and white developers seemed really hungry to make Detroit yet another place to gentrify, whether this wall arose through a true collective process with any consent or input beyond the collective process within the magic itself, which most people weren't involved in. Some people would probably stay if they simply knew they could leave. The wall raises this question of coercion even if all other needs are being met. And then there's the risk that making it porous might end the thing that makes it special. It reminds me of Killmonger's critique of Wakanda in Black Panther and its isolationism.
Uh-huh.
And I also think of an episode of your podcast with Autumn, How to Survive the End of the World, when you were talking to two rabbis, Jessica Rosenberg and Ariana Katz, the authors of a book called A Radical's Guide to the Jewish Year, where Autumn was thinking about how if your core identity is exile, you can never belong even where you are and where you could belong. And she links up strains of Jewish self-conception to a version of this exile-centric thought within certain aspects of the Black experience, which made me think of something else that I heard elsewhere from Daniel Kahn, contrasting an exile model to a here-ness model, that in diasporism, which inherently relates to exile, the word diaspora comes from the word for seeds and sowing, of seeds being strewn across the land. But the idea of here-ness, or Doigkeit in Yiddish, which comes from the Jewish Labor Bund, while it's related to diasporism, it's not the same thing. That diasporism is about displacement, and Doigkeit, or here-ness, is about this placement.
Mm.
And lastly, I think of an Instagram post you did, a little video introducing us to ancestors and saying one of its animating questions is, quote, "What is the world we want to make? What would be better than utopia? Because utopia is so dangerous." So this wall debate raises lots of important questions and largely leaves them open rather than answering them. Questions of home, questions of identity, questions of freedom and autonomy, questions of sacrifice for the collective, questions of utopia. And your fear of utopias makes me think of Le Guin's notion of ambiguous utopias. And again, we could return to The Dispossessed or to Always Coming Home as books that complicate utopias while suggesting them at the same time. But talk to us more, or talk into more, the fraught questions around the wall. I can see myself toggling between both sides of this question. And it's good, but it's also uncomfortable at the same time, right? Like it's this sense of like, well, if I were in this council meeting, if I had to be part of this governance of this society, how would I vote? I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple of roots of all this for me, question and problem. One is that I am a Virgo who tends to believe in the rightness of my ideas. And I will often come up, and I would do this as a facilitator. I'd be like, here's the most beautiful agenda, or here's the most beautiful ritual, or this is it, right? And so I'm like, if I was helping build a society, I would be like, everyone, of course, wants to be in this society. It's fucking awesome. I mean, like, we took care of everything. Like, it's perfect. And this idea that happens in the book where, like, Dune, through magic, through love, through ritual, through grief, she helped to channel something down into the city of Detroit. And the city of Detroit answers her by being like, oh, I will grow a wall around myself to keep you all safe, right? That's what happens in Maroons, is that the city is like, I'm trying to protect you and I'm trying to help you. And I hear what you're saying and you feel scared and I'm going to protect, I got you. And I'm going to get this place. And I loved when I ended Maroons. I was like, this is great. We're great. We're fine. I don't even know if we need to do anything else. Like, we're really good. Right. And so then as I started working the third book, I was like, oh crap, they're just behind this wall. And like, how would the wall feel if I wasn't the one who grew it? How would the wall feel if I wasn't the one who saw it happen, if I didn't know Dune, right? So I had to put myself in other people's shoes and be like, yeah, this whole community was getting started in Murmur City, and they're like, now a wall just grew out of nowhere. Like, trying to imagine what that was like for them. And it's like, now there's a wall here and now we're all in it. And now you're saying you're the source of it. How do we relate to you? How do we relate to each other inside this space? And it's the fundamental organizing question to me is like, are we actually trying to help people be free and think for themselves and coexist on this earth? Or are we just trying to create a better prison that makes us happy, or a better, you know, articulation of like, yeah, if we just build this rigid system or this rigid system, and I look at it over and over again, one religion after another, it's like, now here are the new rules by which to be in this earth. And if you go outside of them, you don't get the safety of the border of protection that we have created with this identity. I see it in places where people are like, this is how we're going to construct this. I think a lot of, when you look at the situation that's happening in Gaza right now, where folks are like, oh yeah, they're just living over there. And it's as long as they're over there and we know where they are, then that's going to make us safe. Nope, that's not safe enough. We have to eliminate them. It's like the positionality that you sit in changes everything about how you feel about every wall in the world, every wall that you're on either side of. Like when you start to recognize like somebody created this for themselves. Did they think of me or not think of me? And am I free to go? Am I free to stay? Am I safe to enter? And I'm always talking about movement being a sanctuary, the ideas I have of the future as sanctuary. And I think maybe sanctuary is what I'd rather have than utopia, because sanctuary doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean that there's no problems. It's just like, this is a safe place to come and be. And that's what I realized. So I was like, I want to create a Detroit that is a safe place to come and be. And the big humility of this book is that it can't happen just because any one human wants that to happen or any group of humans wants that to happen. There has to be the humility of turning and getting in right relationship with the earth, and the earth being like, okay, like together is the only way we could ever make that true. Like the earth and the people working together are the only way we could create the kind of safety at the scale we're talking about. And I don't want to give, too much spoiler stuff about how we land in this, but I do want to tell people that I think the more we invest in building relationships in place and with place, the more chance we have at creating something that is truly sanctuary, where, small magics happen. And I've been a part of this before where, I was like, I live in the South, and there are times when I will be driving and I'm like, I got lost or I lost my GPS. I'm just out here. Everywhere I look, I see a Confederate flag. Everywhere I look, I see signs that I shouldn't be here and that I'm not safe here. But then I'm like, the earth is underneath all this conflict. The earth is not worried about that hatred. And I'm a creature of the earth. And so I'm like, literally will tie in and be like, watch over me, protect me, help me get through this place, whatever it is. And I literally am like, maybe they just don't even need to notice my car or whatever. I'm like, can I pass through undetected? And like the little maroon space of my car or whatever. But then I'm like, how do we create those pockets and then grow those pockets of safety? And there's something about that strategy that feels particularly like I didn't know as I was writing it that it was going to be like, this is the exact medicine for this time for me, for the way that someone like myself thinks, which is like, I'm not willing to give up on humans having a sanctuary on earth and having an existence on earth. I feel really committed to trying to make that work for as long as I can. And I don't feel like spending my whole life fighting against these systems. I don't want to. It's so exhausting. And I don't think that's the best use of my time in my life. And so there's something about this sanctuary option, right? That's like, is there a way to opt out and can the earth help us? And I'm now looking at the world very differently, where I'm like, there are places that you never hear about. And I wonder if there are people living those places in peace. There are places that you don't see. And I'm like, can they live there in peace? And because of the interdependence of all things, I know there has to be some relationship at all times. I'm like, well, I don't know if we can be in peace if like the whole global temperature is rising. I don't know how much peace we can experience, but I do think as we transition from this economy and this societal structure to whatever comes after this, I think that those of us who can create these pockets of sanctuary are going to become the compelling future that's available in that time, right? Like when I imagine, someone walking along the road and being like, oh, here's a place where people are choosing to live with each other and with the earth. And over there is a vigilante who's like, if you decide to like hate with me, then you can join this. I'm like, I think I'll go with the first option. And I think part of our work, I think of Toni Cade Bambara all the time, and the work is to make the revolution irresistible. But that was part of what I was also trying to do with these books is be like, look, like this would be a great place. Like people are having sex, they're having fun, the kids are having a great time, they're still having drama, they're still having the full emotional experience, they are free, they are at choice, and they're in their dignity. And like everyone's going to die, but not right now.
Yeah.
And that feels like good,
Yeah.
And there's still some magic. And we haven't even begun to really explore what the magic is. Like those are deep dive in Octavia's work, or like there's a way you can imagine all of her universes as one big super universe. And a lot of Ursula's work is that way too, where there's like, if you zoom out from time and space, you can see these as part of the same world. And I think there will be at some point some writing that I do that is like generations forward from this like near future Detroit maroonage is like, well, then what would happen in a couple generations down from that? I can feel that, some spirit knocking at my door with that story. But for now, this one feels like this is as compelling as I could get it.
Well, as we approach an end, I wanted to ask you a question about ancestors. It's ancestors themselves. In the book you write, even when we are in a body, part of us stays ancestral. And that makes me think about my conversation with Madeleine Tien, where she talks about how she wanted to reproduce the way we perceive the night sky, but on the page, the way we perceive the 3 dimensions of the sky as 2-dimensional, where 2 celestial bodies can sit side by side in the sky and look to be a similar distance from us, even though one is much farther away. One might even be from another time, already extinct, but its light still reaching us the same to our eye as the one that still exists right next to it, all laid out on the page of the sky in this way, ancestor and contemporary, far and close, in the same plane, which I think you do too with this trilogy. There's also a video of you on a YouTube site called Relational Activism, and that video was in a playlist called Relational Heroes. That when your video finished, it immediately went into an interview with Toni Morrison, where she's asked if she believes in ghosts or if she believes in spirits. And then she goes into telling a story of her mother, that when her mom was 6 or 7, she was outside playing with her sister, and on their way home to their house, they both saw their great aunt sitting on a tree stump. So Toni's mother runs toward her aunt, but her aunt wags her finger at her, no, don't come near me. So she returns to the house, only to learn from her parents that her great aunt had just died. I also think of one of your Murmurations columns in Yes magazine called Accountable to Our Ancestors, where you expand the notion of ancestor to not just blood, but chosen ancestors. And you talk about a saying you love, that I am my ancestors' wildest dream. And I wonder if we could talk about your notion of ancestors, especially when, unlike Dune, who has many great ancestors, many people have horrible ones, or or they have a rupture in their family so great intergenerationally that they couldn't name their ancestors. How does one name or call upon ancestors? Does that include the nasty ones? And what does it mean to be accountable to our ancestors, all of whom you say, one to the next, good or bad, have the wisdom of death?
Yes. So, well, first of all, I was getting chills as I listened to you recount the Toni Morrison story, because I have a similar story when my grandmother died, that she came and played with me on a playground. And then I found out she was gone. And it was like, oh, there's no way she could have been at this playground. Like she's in the hospital. But as a kid, it didn't bother me at all that she was there with me. And it just was like so easy to be with her, which I think is a clue about this ancestral realm and the ancestral reckoning. Like when my grandfather died, my youngest, no, my oldest sibling saw him down a hallway and was like, "Oh, Papa's down there." And my dad, who I don't think of as generally being someone who's like all spirit aware, he's like our military, rules and tangible realm, but he was the one who coached my nibbling in being in that moment. He was like, "It's okay, don't be scared. They're just here to visit you and try." And it was just like such a beautiful, I'm like, oh, I think so many of us have these little experiences we tuck into our pockets of having seen the more than tangible world or felt it. So when I say ancestral, in some ways I'm shorthanding spiritual, because ancestral implies like having been here. When I think of my ancestors, I'm like, the wisdom of death is the common denominator. And I definitely have ancestors across the entire span. And I think there is something about spirit that either loops through lives or comes through and practices again or learns something, but there's something about spirit that is coming into life and still available and accessible while you're in life and that you return to. I do feel that. And there's just been too many experiences in my life where I would witness something, I would see something, I would feel something. And I was like, there's no explanation for this other than spirit, and particularly ancestral spirit, where I'm like, that person knows me from before I was born. Like they know everything that came before me. um, and then this wisdom of death, when ancestors visit me, I think there's a way that they're touching me and being like, "You're not going to live forever. While you're there, here's your assignment. Don't get too big for your britches. Like, don't let your ego, because you're alive right now, make you think you're better than anyone who came before." That's not how it works, I think we can make that mistake sometimes of like, well, back then they were ignorant, but right now I'm like, we're doing the same stuff. We got genocides and apartheids going. We've got patriarchy going. We're, regressing into let's see what our healthcare provides. It's all happening. And there's an understanding of time that it's all now. And I feel like when I was writing this set of books, I was really trying to understand, what if it's all concurrent? Like if the ancestral realm is this now place, this here place that is on top of and with the Detroit that Dune can see and experience. And there's a moment where she's learning with Mama Roo, and Mama Roo gives her just an inkling of what it's like to be in her ancestral experience. And they're wildly different. The way Mama Roo experiences ancestral communication versus how Dune experiences it. That excited me. The idea that like many of us, maybe all of us, have a way to access ancestral communication and be in relationship with spirit, but that it looks different for each of us. And maybe each of us can handle different things. Like mine come to me pretty directly in the form of a song, usually one at a time. But I have been in rooms where I was running a ritual and I felt everyone's ancestors all come crowd into the room. And I knew I could hold that, like that I could facilitate that because I was collaborating with my ancestral facilitators and I wasn't working alone. Like I can do that. And then someone else, the way they access it is through deep ritual or through silent meditation or through playing basketball or through something, like it's just amazing how people can access this sense of like aliveness in a context in which life goes beyond the span of death. It's this vastness. And I think for many of us, I love that Madeline Tien quote because I'm like, for many of us, we literally just can't comprehend it. Like sometimes you need someone to hold your hand to just comprehend the vastness of what we're talking about or the possibility of what we are. And that some part of us may already be extinct. Some part of what we're witnessing and think is real may already be extinct. The first thought that comes to me is like, capitalism may already be extinct. Somewhere in time, it's already extinct. Patriarchy may already be extinct. And when I was writing these books, there was a way that I was like, these things are not extinct, but they're going extinct. There's a lot of systems that are going extinct. And I think a lot of how that extinction will happen, will play out, will be place by place. Like that you will be like, I've got to deal with the extinction situation that's happening right here, where there's either a lot of death. And, I do want to say that like, I think that when people die unjust deaths, there's a particular way that they come back and support those who are still living and still in that struggle. It might be metaphorical, but I think it might also be like spiritual warriorship. And I think it creates these holy portals in different places. And I think it creates, yeah, just possibilities for partnership, ancestral partnership. So whenever I see people doing great harm, when I see people enacting a genocide, I'm like, I wouldn't play with all that. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't create that many spirits who have experienced injustice and then expect that your nation will be able to live or will have a life worth living. Like, it toxifies something in the spirit it takes generations to cleanse and it takes generations to heal from. And right now we have all these wounds, all this toxicity and not enough healing. And we have all these ghosts and ancestors who are like, I've been generated through the injustice of enslavement, of the Holocaust, of these genocides. I've been put here. And I think ancestors also have some work to do. I do think there's some layers. I'm also trying to play with that, and I won't know obviously until I die, but I do think there's some layers. There's some ancestors that are always with me. I'm like, are you like assigned to me or something? Like, why are you always present? And then there are others where I'm like, oh, you're at peace and I think you've just gone on your way. And I don't yet know what the distinction is. And maybe the distinction is like someone on earth still needs you, so you still have an assignment. But I love thinking that there's still a level of complexity and divergence of path, even in that realm. And then, like, what happens in these stories for me is that there is a liberation for Black people that also happens, where it's like if you're in a place that doesn't love you, sometimes the only path towards liberation is to become spirit and to become ancestral and to begin to partner from that place that maybe nothing else will work. And I hope that we don't get there. And that's not what I want for people. I want people to live their whole lives and just live without having to fight for it. I think about this all the time that I'm like, some people are so determined to make everything miserable. And the minute you turn away from that, life is so beautiful. And I really am just like, how do we get these people to just leave us alone? Like, if you want to go play war games, like, go find your little corner and just blow each other up and leave the rest of us out of it. Let us live because it's so great here. And then the ancestors, I think when the ancestors feel that peace in us, when they're like, oh, you're living well, you're rooting well, like, I can feel their joy. When I have a good day and I take a bath and I take care of my body and I make good love and I have a great time playing with the kids in my life and I talk to my mom and my dad, like when I like tie in and then I get enough quiet time, I'm just like, this is good. This is enough. Like, I just need space to live and it's good. And my ancestors wanted that for me.
Well, the first book in the trilogy, Grievers, opens with the line, Dune was new to touching death. And the second book, Maroons, ends with the line, they did not die. And Ancestors with the line, they had time.
Yeah.
In the spirit of Ancestors, perhaps we should go out with the words of another, Ernestine Hayes, the Tlingit writer whose poem Spoken Forest opens Ancestors. Could we hear Spoken Forest?
Yeah, I'd love to read this for you. And she gave such enthusiastic permission for this. So, sorry, when I speak about the ancestors, they get up in my throat. So that's someone's here with us. Let's see if she'll let me read this poem. So it's called The Spoken Forest. I was thinking about the forest one day, and it came to me. Our stories, our songs, our names, our history, our memories are not lost. All these riches are being kept for us by our aunties, our uncles, our grandparents, our relatives, those namesakes who walk and dance, wearing robes that make them seem like bears and wolves. Our loved ones, those beings who live in the spoken forest, they are holding everything for us. Ernestine Hayes.
Thank you, Adrienne Maree Brown, for doing another epic conversation with me.
Thank you, David Naiman. I love doing this conversation with you. And I want to invite all the listeners to go outside after this conversation and find a literal tree that's got some branches that you can get close to and just talk to the tree for a little while and see if it doesn't move closer to you and see if that doesn't feel like an ancestor visit. I've been doing this a lot lately and I keep telling people like this is a baby step. into this understanding that the trees are our ancestors and the earth is our ancestors. And like everything around us is full of like ancestral energy that, the wisdom of death, I think, lets go of the hatred and the domination and all that. And it's just like, oh, I'm just part of this whole connected thing. And our ancestors are there just waiting for you to remember that.
Thank you.
So, all right. It's great to be with you again.
You too. We've been talking today to Adrienne Maree Brown about the third book in her Grievers Trilogy, Ancestors, from AK Press. You've been listening to Between the Covers. I'm David Naiman, your host.
Today's program was recorded at the volunteer-powered, non-commercial, listener-sponsored, full-strength, makeshift home office of me, David Naiman. You can find more of Adrienne's work at adriennemareebrown.net. If you enjoyed today's conversation, consider joining the Between the Covers community as a listener supporter. Every supporter can join our brainstorm of future guests, and every listener supporter receives supplementary resources with each conversation. Of things I discovered while preparing, things referenced during the conversation, and places to explore once you're done listening. And then there are many other things to choose from on top of those. There's the immense and ever-growing bonus audio archive, where most recently, Adrienne sings 2 songs from the Grievers Trilogy, and where Madeline Tien reads Gareth Evans' poem for John Berger, Hold Everything Dear. These join contributions from Dion Brand, Christina Sharp, Leanne Batasamasek-Simpson, Nikki Finney, Isabella Hamad, N.K. Jemison, Layli Long Soldier, Natalie Diaz, Omar El Akkad, and many others. There's also, just to name a few, the Tin House Early Readership subscription, getting 12 books over the course of a year, months before they're available to the general public. There are rare collectibles from past guests, and a bundle of books selected and curated by me and sent to you. You can find out more at patreon.com/betweenthecovers. Or if you prefer a one-time donation, you can do so by PayPal at tinhouse.com/support. I'd like to thank the Tin House team, Elisa Ogie in the book division, Beth Steidel in the art department, Becky Kramer in publicity, and Lance Cleland, the director of the Summer and Winter Tin House Writers Workshops. Finally, I'd like to thank past Between the Covers guest, poet, musician, composer, filmmaker, performer, and much more, Alicia Jo Ravens, for making the intro and outro for the show. You can find out more about her work, her writing, her music, her film, at aliciajo.com, ALICIAJO.com.